through them. And a lot of them keep recurring, like her interest in the Kabbalah and in numbers, all the animal stuff that comes up in her book where people are having this bestial side to themselves or having to deal with this animal-like nature. And the way that you kind of weave all that together is really striking in the book. And I think it's...
Well, you know, I'm happy to take the accolade, and I always like to be complimented and praised, but the wonderful thing about her is that that's actually really obvious when you read her, that she has these themes that are really consistent. And they're philosophical themes that haunt her really from the time she's a child, which is why, I mean, the book is called Why This World. That's a part of a longer quote, but she's asking, why is the world the way it is? Why is the world as cruel as it is also? You know, thinking of her mother and thinking of these horrible things that happen to them. Why is it as random as it is? Is there any possibility of God? And if so, how do we find God? And is it by the animal nature or through the human nature? And she develops these themes over and over and over. And the themes of birth and death, the themes of God and love. These are not easy themes. She was, you can see her face. I mean, she was a lady who was not afraid to look at people straight in the eye. And she does, and she's quite defiant and fascinating to see the evolution of those thoughts.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
I do want to move on to talking about her work itself, but two last things I think are entertaining that everyone will enjoy about like the myth of Clarice is the Meryl Streep thing and the telenovela thing.
Oh yeah, this is hilarious. We're making this movie. It is true. We're making a movie of her life. Actually, two movies. There's going to be a documentary. I was talking to Lily about this. We're making a documentary in Britain about her life, and it is a fascinating life. It's not just that her work is fascinating. Some people, have great works and they live in the suburbs and take their kids to school. But she also did not only have an epic work, but she had an epic life. And so we're going to do a factual documentary about her in Britain, which I hope will then be shown in other countries and get more people interested in her. And then we're making a feature film that's sort of semi-fictional. And the reason he's asking about this is that there's this rumor, this is totally not true, but it has, I can just say not true, and you can believe me or not believe me, but I'm telling you it's not true, that Meryl Streep is going to play her. And this is like one of these internet urban legends that has circulated in Brazil for the last 6 months. And every week it'll show up in some different state or some other city. Someone will discover this on Twitter and write some article about it, and then it'll go crazy, and my phone will start ringing at odd hours of the night. And I'll say, I'm sorry, I really appreciate your concern, but it's not true. And they'll say, oh. They're like, you can tell me. I promise, I wish I would tell you if it was true, it's not true. And but that does speak to the legendary quality. I mean, Brazilians really, really love her. They would love, I think Americans don't really know how powerful American culture is in terms of how, because we don't care, we have our senators talking about bombing different countries. It's a pretty normal thing to have happen on a daily basis in this country. And you don't realize that, we're like, there they go again. But actually, American culture has a sort of power to it that people from other cultures feel completely dazzled by, but also thwarted by. And they say things like, well, why should Sylvia Plath, just to come back to that thing, why should she have a movie about her and Clarice not? Because actually Clarice is a better writer and she's a more important figure and she's more interesting. And the answer is, like I was saying about just like military and economic power is unequal, cultural power is unequal too. And so there's a real longing for on the part of Brazilians, I think, this is just my theory, Brazilians know how much incredible richness to their culture there is and how much really interesting stuff there is down there. And it's not second place to anybody anywhere. But it happens in Portuguese and it happens in Sao Paulo, and so who cares, And so there's a real longing for that. That's kind of my theory about why people are so excited about this. And it's both an honor to be able to be a conduit from another culture to English language culture, but it's also a bit depressing because you realize how few people do that in the world. I'm not saying I'm so great, I'm saying you have to actually spend a lot of time reading Brazilian literature, and not everybody has the time, and and people try to do it from different angles. And you know, if you're interested in China, then you work for China, or if you're interested in Russia, you know, there's a hunger. It's sort of you just wish that there was more outlets. And what was the other question?
I can actually tell the story. So
okay.
the story is that there's a telenovela in Brazil that's very popular. I assume very popular.
Yeah.
And in this, there's a still that Ben had at the last talk of where a guy is giving this woman a copy of Clarice Lispector's book as a way to pick her up. And this uses
both
technique.
They're both married. It's hilarious. And so it's like, how do you pick up this woman that's like, I think they're neighbors or something, and he gives her this book. I mean, it's so funny. Clarice was, in her life, you know, she was famous among the artists and intellectuals, so she didn't have the sort of mass cinematic appeal she has now. But the guy's like, I got this book for you. And she said, ooh, Clarice Lispector, like, wow, how fascinating. She talks about life, you know. And she's like, you know, and they end up sleeping together because of this woman who like sold 12 books in her lifetime, died pretty poor and in not great circumstances.
Horrible way. And now, you know, she's this thing that like if you want to have an adulterous affair with your gardener or whatever, like this is the best approach. And it's really like, on the one hand it's kind of ridiculous, but on the other hand it's actually really great because she is such a. It's just to give an example of how her legend is so alive down there. And there's as much you could write about the legend as you could about her actual life and work. It's pretty hot. I'd have to say. Use it as a bit of
don't you think?
Yeah,
and it worked.
Oh, yeah. That's
yeah, I mean, you know, well, I'll let everyone try it, and you can email me if you pull it off, you know.
Sounds like a plan.
Right.
So moving on to this, how did you end up translating The Hour of the Star? Because he's dead, right? So we can talk.
He's dead.
Okay, so Giovanni Pontiero translated The Hour of the Star for New Directions back in 1986. And this translation existed for a while. If I got the story right, they were going to have to reissue this because they ran out of copies on it.
Right.
And they asked you to write an introduction.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I've been coordinating this project with New Directions. We'll have 5. This is the first one. There'll be 4 more coming out in May. So for a total of 5. And then I hope we're going to do a big volume for collected stories. She's very famous as a short story writer. The short stories are magnificent. And I knew that New Directions was planning on reissuing it, and I thought, you just can't do that old translation. And I was just telling Chad that I'm a one-man charitable foundation. Nobody ever paid me to do anything. But I asked for it myself, I guess. But she said, we can't afford to pay you. And I was like, you know what, it's okay, I'm just going to do it. So I did it for free.
In like a week?
3 weeks.
That's whatever.
It was about
it's still superhuman.
It was superhuman. But all the work that I've done on this book, a lot of the thing I'm really proud of in the book is that I found a voice for her in English.
Yeah.
That was a lot of work, and that took several years. If I had just walked in, I have a lot of experience with thinking about how she should sound in English. This book is written in English, obviously. It's all her work throughout her career is translated. And so I can kind of plug that in. The book, it's 77 pages long. So again, I'm happy to take all the credit, but it is not a long book.
But it's dense and complicated, which we're going to talk about in a second. Can I step for 1 second? Sure. One thing that's interesting, so I had both of these and started reading yours, and it was like, wow, some of this is so weird. And I'd look at the other one and be like, wow, this is so much different. And it wasn't until I got to your afterword, which really should be a preface, in which you explain a lot about your concept behind how you did this and your approach to this translation. One thing, I'll just read a couple bits here if you guys don't mind. One thing that's interesting is the story that when Near to the Wild Heart, her first book, was translated into French, which was the first time any of her work had been translated into another language, she got the proofs and flipped out. And it was like, there's no way you can publish this book like this. This is awful. And she said, I admit, if you like, that the sentences do not reflect the usual manner of speaking, but I assure you that it is the same in Portuguese, she writes. The punctuation I employed in the book is not accidental and does not result from an ignorance of the rules of grammar. You will agree that the elementary principles of punctuation are taught in every school. I am fully aware of the reasons that led me to choose this punctuation and insist that it be respected, which I'm going to come back to in a second. But then you explain a bit about how the tendency is to, well, let's read your part. Okay, but basically to smooth it out. Like what Giovanni Contiero did was essentially smooth this out in unbelievably weird ways. Like a very, I mean, there's nothing, these two books are so different in so many ways, and we'll hear this in a second. But first, so you say like the tendency to smooth things out is understandable. It may even to some extent be inevitable. Clarice Lispector's weird word choices, strange syntax, and lack of interest in conventional grammar produces sentences, often fragments of sentences, that veer towards abstraction without ever quite reaching it. Her goal, mystical as well as artistic, was to rearrange conventional language to find meaning, but never to discard it completely. And you also say, yet her books are not untranslatable. They're not littered with regionalism, slang, puns, or inside jokes. Her meaning is almost always perfectly clear. The translator must therefore resist the temptation to explain or rearrange her prose, which can only flatten it and remove from it that foreign aura that is its hallmark and its glory. Which I thought, like, after reading that too, like going back through this book, everything that I thought was kind of strange became very, very clear. I think the way to do this, because I want to talk to you about this punctuation thing more. Actually, I'll do that right now, and then we'll read from it, and then we'll go on. So the very first thing was when I first started reading this, and you can see I have all these marks all over this book. So there's like, I knew right away they're going to use it in class, and
that's so exciting for a writer or a translator to have someone who actually like read the book. It's not that common.
So page 6, there's a sentence where it says, anyway, the material I've got is too... Okay, so what the setup for that, or the start, is that this guy, this writer, is writing this book about this poor woman, Macabea, from the Northeast that comes to Rio, correct? And
the Northeast in Brazilian literature is the traditional poor part, like the South. It's like Mississippi.
Yeah. She's like not cultured in any way. She's always hungry. She sort of sucks at everything, more or less.
She's a third grade education.
She gets this boyfriend that's totally terribly abusive and strange, and eventually she gets hit by a car and dies. And this guy writes this book, and the only way they can ever describe this, and the line that I always use, is that it's like Virginia Woolf written by a prick, because it has this Virginia Woolfian sort of interest in life and in the way that you describe it, but like this guy is so mean as a narrator to her, and then at the same time he'll come through and be like, but I love her, I'm the only person who loves her, no one else would take the time to write this sort of thing.
No one else would even look at her.
Or even look at her.
She's one of life's dispensable people.
So he's saying here, I intend, as I earlier suggested, to write in an ever simpler way. Anyway, the material I've got is too plain and meager, comma. The information about my character is sparse and not very elucidating, comma. This information that painstakingly comes from